We're going to spend a lot of time this semester talking about the First Amendment, talking about what it contains, what it does for us, how it's helped shape our country. So let's figure out where it came from and what exactly it contains. The history behind this, and we touched on it a little bit in the lecture before, is that democracy needs to be talked about. It needs to have freedom of expression. It needs for people to be able to get the information that they need to be an informed electorate. And so, Thomas Jefferson's line here that a democracy can't be both ignorant and free. So to inform the public, to keep everyone participating and as aware as they needed to be, we needed protection in that in our new government. So the founders of the Constitution, our founding fathers, wrote into it a Bill of Rights. There were 10 of them to begin with. The first one, the First Amendment, which is what we're going to talk about the most. But these first 10 kind of contain the substantive guarantees that we had of the liberties that this country was founded upon. So I mentioned to you before, this is what the First Amendment says. I'm not going to read it again, but you're welcome to read it. I encourage you to read it. It's important that we know what it says. Again, it was adopted as part of the Bill of Rights in 1791, and it was drafted by James Madison, who was elected promising that he would do just this. Now, it's important to remember that the founding fathers did not think of this as a luxury. This was not like something like, hey, this would be great if we had this. They truly believed that for democracy to exist, we had to have freedom of expression, and we had to be able to educate and have criticism. We had to be able to criticize the government. So most of really how our country's developed is because of this public debate and disclosure of information. So I want you to think about some of the key things that we've had. Most recently, of course, the same-sex rights. We've had transgendered rights. We have the civil rights movement. All of these things have come out of our ability to debate and petition the government, to have freedom of expression, freedom of ideas, and really we've made enormous strides as a people because of this freedom. So the best news is, we're number one, so that must mean we're super important, and we are super important. As a press, I say we, but there's other things in the First Amendment too, and so we need to really kind of see the whole thing as one complete picture before we break out that freedom of the press aspect or freedom of speech. But these are the 5 freedoms that were guaranteed by the First Amendment. This freedom of religion, and really it's a freedom of and from religion, our ability to either practice our own religion or not be engaged in religion if we wish, freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom to gather and make statements as part of that gathering, freedom of the press, and then freedom to petition the government for redress. So let's break this out a little bit. Freedom of religion basically prevents the government from establishing an official religion, and that was important because England did just that. So it also gives all of us individual freedom over which religion we choose to practice, how we choose to express ourselves in our religion. We are free to exercise religion, which means we can go anywhere that we want to practice our religion, or we are free not to practice our religion, practice any religion if we don't wish to. And so, I want you to get an idea as to how important this might have been to the founding fathers at the time that it was created. Now, there's 2 aspects, key aspects of the freedom of religion. One is the Establishment Clause, which is the government has to remain neutral about religion, and it can't establish its own. It can't endorse any specific religion. We can't appear to approve or disapprove of any religion. And think about how this is coming into play with some of our more recent discussions about religion as it exists in our society, and we'll certainly be talking about that. And of course, we can't endorse believing over not believing. So it's important that we maintain objectivity related to religion from a government standpoint. And we also have this exercise clause, which says that I can't be prevented from practicing my religion. The way I practice my religion can't be regulated by the government. Now, the only thing that may come into play there, of course, if there are things that interfere with specific law. So polygamy, we have laws in place where you're not allowed to be married to more than one person, which is why that's a problem. Things that dealt with animal sacrifice and things we've had some challenges over, but ultimately the goal is for it to be as free as it can be. Now, one of our other rights, of course, is the freedom to assemble. We can come together peaceably, private or public setting, in order to organize on behalf of the populace for things that are important to us. We can join political groups, religious groups. We can be free from any influence of the government in the creation of these groups and the joining of these groups. That hasn't always been in case, and we'll certainly take a look at some of the instances, most notably in the 50s with communism, where that wasn't necessarily the case, but this is our overall idea with this. The right to petition a government. So we have the ability to tell the government we want changes. Think about how many times petitions have been sent to the government that have initiated change, that we collect signatures to our elected representatives, or we email those representatives or mail them, send letters to them, hoping that we can facilitate change. That's all protected in the First Amendment. And freedom of speech, that's a big one. This prevents the government from censoring our opinions or ideas. It ensures that we do not have restrictions on our speech because of the content. And we have the right to criticize the government. Historically, we've had some challenges to that, but that's the fundamental idea, is that this idea of criticizing the government will enable us to have a better government. Now, speech can take different forms. So there's something that's called pure speech that's been identified by the court, really, and that can be written or spoken, image. I mean, this is an idea that speech is very clearly identifiable. It can also be symbolic, so I want you to think about conduct. I note flag burning here, but there's other conduct, and we're going to talk about what exactly is symbolic speech. And then in that, we have two elements. So we have an actor and we have the audience. And what we need for symbolic speech to be protected is that the audience see that speech, understand what that message is. And so we'll talk about how there's some situations where what we might think to be symbolic speech is not necessarily protected because of the way it's being received. Now, speech isn't absolute. There are restrictions. Schools certainly have put restrictions on students, and we're going to talk about that in another lecture. We have the ability to kind of put some sort of boundaries on it as it protects the welfare of a community or the school, and we're going to see how the courts really kind of interpreted that. Now here's the big one for us, freedom of the press, and this basically says, and it's important we know what it says and what it doesn't say, that the government cannot control the media. It can't control what's printed in newspapers or books or the internet or what's really broadcasted on television or radio. We're allowed to get our information from any source, and you're certainly seeing a lot of that now, but we do certainly have some control. So I mentioned broadcast. We have restrictions on what can be broadcast when, whether we can have profanity or nudity. So there are abilities for laws to be made that will kind of corral that in a bit, but really the fundamental idea is that we are not licensed, the media is not licensed, the dissemination of information is relatively free in this country, especially compared to others. Now, freedom of the press relates to the dissemination of information, not always the collection, and we're going to see this semester how the collection can kind of be impacted by legal decisions.